Hola, ¿cómo están? Bienvenidos a una nueva emisión del Cofre de Miguel. Hoy les voy a presentar la tercera parte del documental de la historia del rock producido por la BBC y en este caso va a estar dividido en dos partes muy marcadas. La primera, donde nos meterán en toda la historia del sello Motown, que como ustedes saben fue el sello más importante que tuvo la comunidad afroamericana para difundir a sus músicos. En este caso vamos a ver reportajes a varios artistas de este sello, como Wilson Pickett, Otis Redding, actuaciones de Marvin Gaye, las Supremes, Marvelettes, otro grupo vocal femenino, un grupo muy conocido por su hit Cebollas Verdes, que era Booker T and the McGees, y para todos los nostálgicos quizá nos traiga recuerdos todo esto de el disco compilado de Roscoe Show, que era un disc jockey de esa época, y en el disco había muchos temas de estos artistas afroamericanos. Y luego en la segunda parte del documental vamos a tener una aproximación a lo que fue el blues blanco, que como ustedes sabrán tuvo artistas muy famosos en Inglaterra, como es el caso de Eric Burdon, Eric Clapton. Vamos a ver a los Rolling Stones en sus comienzos, Alexis Corner, distintas bandas de blues blanco como fueron los Yardbirds, Cream, y uno de sus mejores guitarristas, también en un lindo reportaje, que fue Jeff Beck. Y en el final, una pequeña aproximación ya al comienzo de un fenómeno de la guitarra como fue Jimi Hendrix. Bueno, los dejo entonces con esta tercera parte de la historia del rock.
Berry Gordy controlled every step of the process, from selection of the artist to their choice of song and the publishing rights. This meant that the organization was strong enough to withstand the Beatles when they came in 1964. Even a former company secretary had a record in the charts.
It's amazing how fast Motown grew. I was only a secretary there for 9 months. But at the end of that 9 months, everybody was famous. Everybody had a record out, and I never looked back. I gave my job to 3 girls from Secretarial College.
Gordy knew, however, that the key for Motown's long-term success was to build up a strong songwriting team. Many of Martha and the Vandellas' early hits were written by 2 brothers from Detroit who had grown up steeped in gospel music.
And you pray.
Eddie and Brian Holland teamed up with their friend Lamont Dozier to write over 20 top 10 songs for Motown.
That's our favorite song right there. It took me a while to write songs. I couldn't do them real quick. It would take me some time to sort of juggle each word around and this word around, mostly to go for the feeling of it, you know. Not necessarily the rhyming, the feeling, you know, where you could feel it, where you could walk away and it would be sort of a haunting feeling, you know. And my concept was always basically, if you missed 30% or 50% of the lyric, you would still know what the song was about.
Here's your friendship ring.
Holland Dozier Holland, as the team called themselves, followed Berry Gordy's style of simple lyrics, but with a distinctive musical addition of their own.
At that time, the rhythm was usually buried on a record. You didn't hear it. Just a small pulse, you'd feel it. But when Holland Dozier Holland came on the scene, it became rhythm out front. They had stomping boards. They'd take a board and put on some tuba board and stand on it and stomp. They'd shake chains, scratch on the wall. They did all kinds of sounds and rhythm, and they were just creative. Anything that sounded pretty decent, they'd do.
Motown sound would never have happened had the musicians not been the skillful guys that they were and the tasty jazz musicians that they were, because they allowed us to be heard. They played special things where you could fit your vocals in just like they fitted their music together. That's the reason for the real grooves that we had, because of the Funk Brothers.
The Funk Brothers was the nickname given to the jazz musicians Gordy had brought in as the Motown session band. The company's young producers used them whenever possible to give their records a leg up on the competition, which often came not from the Beatles, but from just down the hall.
The real competition was within the Motown. The Norman Whitfields, the Smokey Robinson, the Ivy Joe Hunters, and Mickey Stevenson. That was the real competition, because you felt if you did not come up with that follow-up, somebody would be there, oh, the guys missed this time. Let's rush in and cut this. I think we got them. It was that type of thing. So that was really the only true competition that you were really aware of or felt.
Whoever had the hit on the last artist would get the first shot on that same artist again. And so some people had locks on artists, like Smokey had a lock early on Mary Wells, and he also had a lock on the Temptations after the way you do the things you do.
Smokey sits down at the piano and he passed the lyrics around, and I'm reading the lyrics and said, "What? You got a smile so bright, you know you could have been a candle." That's hokey. But the more I looked, at it, and we started putting the harmony together, I said, this is some pretty clever stuff, even though it was very simple, but it had a nice, unique thing about it. And once we put the voices together and rehearsed it and went in the studio and we heard the track and we put it all together, that was the one.
Girl, you could have been anything that you wanted to, and I can tell the way you do the things you do.
And it wasn't until he did a song called Get Ready that didn't make it that big that Norman Whitfield got a shot. And he then came up with a record called Ain't Too Proud to Beg, and it just blew Smokey out of the water.
Ain't too proud to beg, and you know it.
So that's the kind of competition, and everybody was fair game.
Ain't too proud to beg.
Several producers had recorded a young trio from the projects called the Supremes, but the group remained hitless for 3 years until Holland Dozier Holland tried a new approach.
We had watched people come into Motown, be signed, and get a hit record and go on. And we were the first female girl group there, So anyway, when Eddie brought us this song, it was to be our, I think, 12th release, something like that. I heard the song, we heard the song, and at that time I was kind of more or less the spokesperson. I spoke up, And I said, Eddie, we want a hit. This song is not a hit. And I said, it's nothing. It's like, baby, baby, where did our love go? Baby, baby. I said, it's nothing. I said, look at Martha and the Vandellas. We want a hit like theirs. We want a soulful record. And he said, Mary, trust me, this is going to be a hit. I started crying. I was begging the guy, please give us a hit. This is how desperate we had become.
But now that I surrender so helplessly, you know what I need. Where did I love go? Don't you want me? Don't you want me no more?
The song was the first of 5 number ones running for the Supremes, and they joined the other artists on what had become a company institution, the Touring Motown Review.
How about it, ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it. I'm Smokey Robinson, star, Motown Review. Take your time, ladies and gentlemen, join us to the Bill Murray thing. Thanks for having this show. And don't forget to keep in mind, once again,
The Motown Review, the very first one was 94 one-nighters. That's 3 months of living on a bus. Out of those 94 one-nighters, we had about 3 hotel stays. So it was actually sitting on that crowded bus with a 12-piece band and 8 or 9 acts.
That was also in the days of the Freedom Riders. And when they see this bus, we came to get gas. And as we stepped out of the bus to go to the Johns, we looked down the street and all the little houses along the street had people standing in the doorway. And behind the door was shotguns.
There were a lot of restaurants that we went in. We had to actually go in the back door and have cold hot chocolate and cold hot dogs. And that's all that we were served.
I remember one place in Texas specifically that we went to the back and we had to wend our way through the garbage cans to a little window about the size of, I guess about that size. And man, they would put our plates paper plates through the window, and we ate on the garbage cans.
But racism was not the only problem Motown faced with its artists.
Before any of the tours really were established, Georgiana from the Marvelettes walked out on the stage. They said, "Now the Marvelettes," and she walked out on the stage with her eyes wide and chewing gum and looking at all the people and said, just country style. And I said, it's not going to work. We got to have a department that would groom the kids. And since most of them were ghetto kids that came from single parent homes, and didn't have all the cultural tactics that's needed, we decided to give it to them.
They asked me to open up a finishing school there, Motown Finishing School. Of course, the youngsters, they came from humble beginning, and some were rude and crude from the street and the project. But with me, it isn't where you come from, it's where you're going.
She taught us how to be elegant, and that's what we wanted. It wasn't something, we weren't being taught something that we didn't want. We wanted to be better. We wanted to, aspire to be the best. She'll say, "Now, ladies." Golly, we used to hate her then. She was the butt of a lot of jokes, I'll say that, because as young girls, we didn't take her seriously. But I did in my heart, and I applied everything she taught me. And I can't really do anything now without thinking of Mrs. Powell. If I sit, if I talk, if I walk, if I carry myself at all, Miss Powell is there.
Marvin Gaye said to me one day, "Miss Powell," he called the finishing school the charm school. "Miss Powell, I don't think I need a charm school. And I don't think I need any training." I said, "Marvin, you don't need as much as some of the other artists, but you do sing with your eyes closed."
I'm a stubborn kind of fella, got my mind made up to love.
And it gives the illusion that you're singing in your sleep. And number one places around the country, you have to have your eyes open. Then we could improve on your walk because you're leading with your shoulders and your head. Everything had to be done in a classy way. So if they were doing the shake or whatever, well, we didn't do it in a vulgar way. With Diana Ross and the Supremes, we worked on singing and expressing yourself, looking pleasant and with a smile and maybe a gesture, and how to handle a mic, you see, so that the mic don't handle you. I don't want you ever to look forward, lean forward. You do not protrude the buttocks.
In many cases, the artists just went out and they sang and they danced and they jumped around. And they wasn't accustomed to having to be concerned about projection and physical drama. You had to add a lot of movement that would be attractive to the ladies, and the ladies had to do movements that would attract the men.
I've been crying 'cause I'm lonely.
Sometimes when I was working with the Supremes on that movement, Mary used to say to me, "You're trying to teach me how to look ladylike," which is exactly what I was doing, because I was giving them moves like very feminine moves where you use your shoulders, you wave your hands, and all this kind of business, and keep you so that the fellas are going to really notice what you're putting down.
We would go into artist development at Motown and work on a song, and it would take hours. And we put in hours every day learning those routines. People have often said that Motown kind of made us over and made us into these sophisticated little dolls, you know. But I think that's something that we brought within ourselves. And so Charlie was able to keep us the way we were, but still keep that sophistication and to keep it sexy and to keep the rock and roll, all that as one unit.
Charlie really started turning up the heat on as far as polishing us and spending more time in artist development, because it got to the point that we would be there so much that, man, we were getting tired of looking at each other, but it was worth it because they were grooming us for the real big stage, the Copacabanas, the Las Vegas, the Atlantic cities, and what have you.
Sometimes we would find that a move might be quite primitive, something that you would see just on the R&B circuit. We'd go something like this here. So what we would do for the presentation and the crossover is try to bring it up and give it a little bit more sophistication. It would look something like this here.
By 1967, Motown acts were playing Las Vegas, the Ed Sullivan Show, and many of the biggest venues across the world.
Do me wrong, but still I'm crazy.
Berry Gordy's goal of producing a constant assembly line of sophisticated pop entertainers had become a reality. For many, Motown's success was Black America's success. A musical accompaniment to the quest for equality led by Dr. Martin Luther King.
Where did I go? Ooh, don't you want me, baby? Don't you want me no more? Ooh, baby.
But to some, the Motor City Company had started to polish its artists too much for white audiences with its cabaret presentation.
With a song in my heart.
For these dissenters, you could still find the real soulful music, but you had to go down south.
I'm gonna wait till the midnight hour. Let's see my love come tumbling down.
What the Temptations did, what the Four Tops did, what Diana Ross and the Supremes did, all of them were top records across the world. But they were da 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 da. But the minute you crossed the Mason and Dixon line and got down here in Memphis, altogether different. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. See?
You would hear songs at Motown that had the influence of the church in the melody, but they would polish it, and they did a marvelous job at doing that. At Stax, we didn't. We just let it all hang out. We went for it, and whatever it was, that's what it was. Whatever you felt, that's what it was.
Stax Records took its name from founder Jim Stewart and his sister Estelle Axton. An early hit in 1960 by local legend Rufus Thomas and his daughter Carla had convinced Stewart to produce more black music. And in 1965, Stax caught the ear of the legendary Jerry Wexler.
It really turned me on to watch the way they recorded, because it was entirely different from what we had been doing in New York and from what everybody else was doing around the country, which was recording with written arrangements, arrangers, and studio players who read the charts.
You didn't have to prepare music. You played a song for them once. The artist could sit down and play it or sing them the song once. They learned the song. No music in front of them telling them go from here to there to there. They learned the song. And they had this intimate relationship with each other where if after they listened to the song once, they said, you take the first verse, you do the fills here, I'll stay out, then you can. About 2 or 3 takes, they learned the song faster than you were prepared to record it.
One of the keys to the spontaneity of Stax recordings was the tight rhythm section, Booker T and the MGs. Despite the fact that Memphis in the early 60s was very much a segregated city, the Stax studio band was built around a multiracial quartet.
We just looked away from the fact that it had never been done before, and we just did it. We played the black clubs, and we played the white clubs, and we stayed in white hotels, we stayed in black hotels, we stayed in white restaurants and black restaurants, and we broke the rules.
The MGs, along with Stax's horn section and the writer-producer team of Isaac Hayes and David Porter, hired a host of artists, including Sam and Dave, Otis Redding, and a former gospel singer Jerry Wexler was producing.
Steal away, I ain't got long to stay. I said I ain't got long to stay.
Wilson Pickett sang on a lot of gospel stuff. And one of the things, when he would get into his sort of sanctified groove on the end, you know, he would go, oh, I want to wait till the midnight hour, see my Jesus in the midnight hour, that kind of stuff. You know? So it's kind of an ID for this guy, you know.
I would always put that in somewhere in the song, in the midnight hour, in the gospel song. It may meet Jesus. It may be soon in the morning, or it may be in the midnight hour. You see, so that midnight hour thing was kicking around all the time. This there.
That's when my love comes tumbling down. I'm gonna wait till the midnight hour.
Wilson Pickett and Steve Cropper wrote In the Midnight Hour during Pickett's first night in town. The next morning, the record's success was assured when Wexler showed the musicians a new dance he'd seen up north.
There was a dance in New York that we didn't know anything about in Memphis called the jerk. And so when, you know, if you remember that dance song, we was cutting in the midnight hour, and he came out and he said, well, can you put it in this jerk dance thing? That's how kind of how that delayed 2 came about.
Wexler, well, he was unhappy about something. He said, hey, baby, can you just put it here, baby? Kink, put it here, baby. Hey, put it right, kink. I didn't know, what the hell is this man talking about?
Al and I just started kind of going with him and just kind of laying back, and I just started playing these backbeats, and it probably was one of the most influential sounds that we had, because we started cutting a lot of records after Midnight Hour hit with what we call a delayed backbeat.
That's when my love begins to shine. Just you and I. Oh, baby.
Pickett's gospel roots, paired with 1965's dance craze, landed Midnight Hour in the charts and paved the way for the even churchier sound of Otis Redding to cross over. Redding had been working as a chauffeur and occasional vocalist for other bands before he embarked on his own solo career.
Otis said he wanted to audition for the record company, and would I play for him? And I said, sure, I'll play for him. So we walked over to the organ, and he started singing These Arms Are Mine. And I was just really moved by the way he sang it, and I was just mostly listening rather than playing. And I felt that I was involved in something good and something significant. And it was always the same with Otis. He always moved me when he sang.
Oh, he made me weary. Young girl, they do get weary wearing that same old jacket dress. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But when she gets weary, a little tenderness. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, man, man, man. I know she's waiting, just anticipating a thing that she'll never, never, never possess. No, no. But while she's there waiting,
Otis Redding came in. And when he came in, it changed well, the lyrics and the way that he presented his version of his music, now he wanted it to go, which turned out to be not gravelly like mine and not rhythm and blues like the others. So that's how soul, I feel like, was slowly gotten into.
In the spring of 1967, while much of rock and roll was being transformed by the emerging hippie culture, the Stax Review took music rooted in the churches of Black America to a new and appreciative audience in Europe.
We sold out every place we went. We broke all attendance records. You know, we didn't go into, at that time it was stadiums, but we were playing those small venues, and we were packing them out because they had never, you know, that gospel thing. To get an audience that involved, to tell them to stand up, do me a favor and get up. At first, you saw the reluctant, like, they weren't really sure, you know, and this guy started with this thing, get up, he's kept, it's like hypnotizing, you know, I'm chanting, get up, do me a favor, get up. Dancers, you know, we would just stand up there shaking and doing the holy, as they call it, the holy dance. You know, you slide it and shift your body all the way across the stage on one leg, all the way across. And that's something I got out of church.
I was apprehensive, very leery of exposing Otis Redding to the thousands of flower children. And here were the Jefferson Airplane. They looked like they were playing with 20-foot Marshall amps. And the Grateful Dead doing their blown boogies. And here comes Booker T and the MGs, and they've got their little Sears Roebuck amps and this tiny sound.
Thank you so much. All right, now.
Well, I don't think we really knew what to expect until we got there. And that was a bit of a shock treatment.
What was it? I mean, we're out there in our green mohair suits, you know, and we thought it was a job, you know, and then everybody's out there in these flowers, you know, the flowers around, you know, and all these flower churches. And I said, holy Lord. I said, the world's coming to an end.
You were there. You want to be free.
What an incredible performance he gave that night. In the middle of the performance, the police chief came to me and he said, everyone was out of their seats, standing on the chairs. He said, I'm going to stop the show right now if they don't sit down immediately. So I went to Otis and, you know, my white boy way, I said, Otis, you've got to let everybody stay in their chairs, be seated and behave and listen to the teacher because they got to stop the show. So Otis said, this is the love crowd, right? And he said, yeah. He said, well, if you love me, sit down. They all sat down, on with the show, no more problem.
This is the love crowd, right? We all love each other, don't we? Am I right? Let me hear you say yeah then. All right. I've been loving you just a little bit too long. And I don't want to stop now. No. And don't make me stop now.
Playing the Monterey Festival had been a gamble for Otis Redding, one which no other soul act had been prepared to take, but one which paid off. His triumphant appearance suggested that he was about to attract an even wider following. Tragically, it was to be almost his last major performance. 6 months later, while traveling to a club date in Wisconsin, his plane crashed, killing all on board.
I love you. Good God Almighty. Good God Almighty. I love
I was like 13. I was listening to offshore English radio, and the only music that appealed to me at all was black rhythm and blues.
We just loved this music. We just wanted to play it. We wanted people to learn about it and to get what we got from it, because it was honest music, you know.
Prompting from anybody else. When I was 13, I remember slashing my own hand open and, you know, writing blues forever in my own blood, in my own diary. I mean, that's pretty radical stuff.
The blues was originally an African-American music, created by Africans who, against their will, had become Americans. The sadness of that conflict lives on in the very earliest songs that came out of the Mississippi Delta. The music traveled north during the 1950s with the migrant workers who went to the urban crucible of Chicago, and the blues went electric. Black music for a black audience, it was largely ignored by rock and roll dominated white America. But in the early 60s, blues records produced by small companies like Chess were to find an unlikely home 4,000 miles away.
heard John Lee Hooker singing things like, I've been working in a steel mill, trucking steel like a slave all day, you know. And I woke up this morning and my baby's gone away, you know. And I related to that directly because that was happening to people, to grown men on my block.
Encouraged by this unexpected interest in their music, black bluesmen began to cross the Atlantic.
I was gone from the first time I heard Muddy Waters' guitar. I heard him rehearsing in the City Hall in Newcastle on a summer's night. The doors were open to let air into the place. I was coming home from college, and I could hear this electric guitar echoing across the city center, and I, whoa, what is that?
Burton started performing rhythm and blues himself after joining a group led by pianist Alan Price. By 1962, the Animals had become the leading band on the Newcastle underground club scene.
Our first gig would be go on stage about 8 o'clock on a Saturday night. We'd finish that place at 11 o'clock, drive across by then to the downbeat and play there till 5 in the morning. On a Saturday alone, we'd have 7 hours on stage in front of an audience. Not sitting in your bedroom practicing.
Yeah, it was genuine underground. And it was amazing to find out that what we were doing in Newcastle, which we thought was strictly our thing, was being done at the same time in other cities by other people.
Belfast was another port which was also listening to the blues, helped along by the supply of imported records brought in by the merchant seamen. A rich collection of jazz and blues built up by George Morrison, a shipyard worker, was an early education for his young son, George Ivan.
Well, John Lee Hooker says it's the truth. That's what I believe. Blues is the truth. Because it's not, you can't glamorize it. You know, it just is what it is. You know, some days are good and some days are bad, and this is reality.
We went walking down by the old graveyard. The morning fall.
Morrison started playing with his group then, and they built up a following at Belfast's Maritime Hotel, before, like Eric Burden and the Animals, moving on to London.
It was very slow when it started. There weren't that many people to begin with. But it gradually sort of built up. And so when that took off, then it became, you know, more acceptable.
Rhythm and blues attracted its greatest following of all within the capital. In the sleepy confines of, particularly to art college students who were drawn by its bohemian appeal and eager to hear more.
You couldn't buy blues records then. There were Josh White records and semi-blues sort of things, but they were unobtainable. You never heard them on the radio, you never could buy a record of blues anywhere. They had to be imported. So you heard about people that had a Muddy Waters album and you borrowed it off them or had a tape made of it. And there was a kind of underground that's how it got to people.
Then material from Muddy Waters, Sonny Boy Williamson and Howlin' Wolf, the pride of Chicago blues, became widely available throughout the UK when Chess Records found a new British distributor through the Pye label, achieving a success which surprised Chess's owners.
On Pye, we had Howlin' Wolf even on the chart. Smokestack Lightning was on the white chart. And Pye became a very hot record company, one of the new English record companies, and we sort of rode along with it. The English discovered Chess, really. The real fanatics always knew it, but the mainstream English music lovers discovered it.
The growing popularity of rhythm and blues in London encouraged musicians to set up clubs devoted entirely to the music. At the forefront was an old jazz player who formed one of the first white electric blues bands.
We wanted to play electric music, and then we were in trouble, because the only clubs that we'd played, apart from our own when we were playing acoustic, were trad jazz clubs. And we were quite welcome in those. But then when we went electric, it really was a case of out, and don't you dare set foot in here again with all that electricity. So we had to start our own club. And there was a strange assortment of people working around then, all of whom wanted to get into the blues thing. Charlie Watts and Mick Jagger and Paul Jones.
When Corner set up the Ealing Club in 1962, it quickly became the most important blues venue of its time, attracting other musicians from all over the country.
It showed me that it was definitely worthwhile considering moving to London and, you know, transferring my day job in art, graphic design. So I started recruiting guys under the name of John Mel and the Blues Breakers. And Alexis Corner was the one who really introduced me to musicians who were around at that time.
It was a kind of a magical gathering of people that had fallen in love with his vibe. And be standing there shoulder to shoulder with Keith Richard and Mick and those guys. And we'd stand in line waiting for Alexis to say, okay, you can come out, you know, you're next, and why don't you two sing together? And, so he was like the grand master of ceremonies, and it was fun.
While the rest of Britain was being swept by Beatlemania, the blues enthusiasts considered it lightweight pop, preferring what they thought to be their own more challenging music. At a suburban railway station, art student Keith Richards bumped into an old school friend, one Michael Jagger, and noticed the large pile of blues records Jagger was carrying.
Let's get us together, right? I mean, he's got Best of Muddy Waters and Rockin' at the Hops by Chuck Berry under his arm, you know. Hey, man. Nice to see you, but where'd you get the records?
Drawn to the growing scene of the Ealing Club, Jagger and Richards met up with a charismatic young musician who encouraged them to form a band, the Rolling Stones.
You one of the original members?
Yes, one of the original members.
What were you doing before you joined?
Well, just sort of bumming around waiting for something to happen, really. I had quite a few jobs, and I was trying to get a band going, but it was unsuccessful until I met up with Mick and Keith, and then...
You played with Alexis and the band that Alexis had, that Charlie was playing drums in. He actually persuaded Alexis to let him get on stage and play. And he heard an Elmore James record for the first time in his life, which I never heard one until about 65 or something, 64. And he said the whole universe shuddered, you know, when he heard this, you know, that slide thing. He immediately got a slide and started playing, and there he was playing when Mick and Keith first went to see the Alexis Corner band.
The first time the Stones played, 3 people came. And I remember Brian Jones saying to me, you know, there's more apart from the stage and there is in the audience, because there were 6 at the time with Ian playing. I said, Brian, how many people do you think we can get in this place? 300? He says, we'll have them. Just imagine 300 people in here and we'll get them. And we went from 3 to 9 to 27 to 100 to 300. All of a sudden, there were queues outside.
For 20 minutes, one song. And the kids used to get hypnotic, you know, and they'd be doing this dance which they couldn't move to. They'd just move their arms and their heads and that, because you couldn't do anything else. You were squashed, so it became a dance, you know.
In a letter to the BBC in January '63, asking for airtime, Brian Jones summed up the group's philosophy. The band's policy is to play authentic Chicago rhythm and blues music, using outstanding exponents of the music, such as Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters, Bo Diddley, Jimmy Reed, etc. The BBC turned them down on the basis that their singer sounded too black.
I'm gonna tell you how it's gonna be. You're gonna give away love is love and I fade away. Well, love is love and I fade away.
The Stones signed up with manager Andrew Loog Oldham, who at first tried to clean up the band's raw image so that they could compete with the Beatles.
Andrew had this real talent for sort of making a splash and a fuss and centering attention on you, which would have taken us a lot longer probably. We hadn't had someone like Andrew. And he was younger than any of us. So he had a very young and very, very irreverent attitude.
We were scruffy. We were the only band around, never wore a uniform, of course, right then, because we didn't have the money for them. So we just used to go on stage in whatever we were wearing at the time. Andrew took us down and tried to get us into these little suits and smarten us up for television and all that sort of thing. We didn't really want to know, and there was just various members just lost bits of the uniform, so we never looked the same anyway.
Them around, and it all gets outfitted. Bill Wyman dressing and reading at the same time. Brian Jones tuning up.
Just had the game. Started moving my feet. Clapping my hands. I said the joint was right.
When the Stones found chart success in late 1963, they quickly grew out of the club circuit, and Giorgio Gomelski had to find a band to replace them.
We didn't want a copycat band of the Stones just to keep the audience, you know. I always felt that we could go further. One element that was kind of missing in the Stones was instrumental improvisation, you know. And so we said, we need to get a band where there are people that can play solo.
The soloist Gomelski found was in a band called the Yardbirds. At 18, Eric Clapton was already a knowledgeable blues player, straight from the Surrey Delta.
Through most of my youth, that my back was against the wall. And that the only way to survive that was with dignity and pride and with courage. And that I heard that in certain forms of music. I heard it most of all in the blues, because that was an individual. It was always one man with his guitar versus the world. And it wasn't a company, it wasn't a band or a group or anything. When it came down to it, it was one guy who was completely...
Well, I'd heard him quite a few times with the Yardbirds in the early configurations when they were starting, and probably for the first year. But I mean, Eric really hadn't got his chops together, as you know, he'd probably tell you. He was just learning to play the blues.
Made me walk from Chicago. Oh, we said you've been gone. Oh, right.
The asthmatic lead singer, Keith Relf, was the nominal front man of the band, but he was completely upstaged by Clapton and the succession of brilliant lead guitarists who would make the Yardbirds one of the most influential groups of the decade. It was appropriate that the Yardbirds' first album should be a live one, as by 1964, most of the blues bands seemed to be forever on the road. Found immediate success.
You only see bands that were going up and down the M1, you know, living out of a suitcase at Ford Transit van, checking in out of B&Bs. I mean, that was life, so there wasn't any speculation about whether you were going to do this or do that. You were just, you know, out there somewhere, you know. And then when that was over, you might check in, had a couple of days off, and then there was more. So there wasn't any time to sort of... The Rolling Stones was a different operation. They had like a whole management setup, and they, you know, had money and that. I mean, you know, we never got paid. We never got anything.
Business acumen did not come easily for many of the blues groups, who often found themselves compromised. The Animals' first single, a song chosen for them by their management, was a chart success, but the band hated the song's poppy sound so much, they refused to perform it live.
Hey, you've done very well. You've got into the hit parade. You're the first Northeast group to get into the hit parade. You've got a follow-up record coming up?
Yeah, it's called The House of the Rising Sun. It's on Columbia.
You're going to do that one for us in just a minute, aren't you?
Yeah.
What other things have you got lined up? Big dates?
Yeah, well, we just finished one, the biggest one of our life, my life, anyway. That's a Chuck Berry tour with Paul Perkins.
How did you go on that? Because I know the Swinging Blue Jeans had a bit of trouble on it.
Yes, well, we went all right.
We're going on the Chuck Berry tour. Everybody's going to try and out-rock Chuck Berry. What we need is a song that will stick in people's memories, and we got a good slot on the Chuck Berry tour. And let's do this this song that is like out of tempo. It's not that dun 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 dun. It's dun 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 dun. And people will remember it. They'll leave the theater remembering the song, the one song that was different out of the whole night. And it worked.
Here we go then. Let's get the Animals and the House of the Rising Sun.
Welcomes the Animals in person, and the young Englishman will be around for a while filming an MGM movie in Manhattan. In New Orleans, the teenage magic so hard to explain to some grown-ups follows the Animals as they take temporary refuge in their hotel.
All of a sudden, bands who we knew, you know, we played with, you know, these bands, with Gogo, with Seed, with Met, along the line. It was almost like this little party that went on with all English bands. Suddenly, 60% of the music in the world was English music.
We're the only band that went to America without a hit record. You know, everybody went. The Beatles went. They had 3 number 1s before they went. The Animals, Herman's Hermits, Day Part 5. They all had number 1 or hit records, top 5 records. We went there and our record was 94 in the charts. No one had ever heard it. That was really brave to do that. We really thought that when we went to America and played them that music, it wouldn't work because it was their music. We didn't realize that the white kids had never heard that music.
The only place you could get black music was on the road. When we'd be on the road, we'd be playing in Nashville, Tennessee, for instance. And you'd have to cross the tracks to hear real black music being played in shacks, you know, in the Chitlin circuit. Corrugated shacks out on, you know, at some crossroads somewhere on the outskirts of town. And it was just within the black community that you could hear the real thing.
Drawn to the mecca of urban blues, the Stones made a pilgrimage to Chicago, their spiritual home, Chess Records, at 2120 South Michigan Avenue.
I think that the Stones understood a certain sexual energy that was in Chess Records music and amplified that into their own music. I didn't meet Jagger and Richards till the Stones had some initial success and then came to Chicago to record at our studios. I think it was their second album.
Like everybody in the world, we're allowed to win it. Chess Studios was hotter than hell. And everybody wanted to come to Chess.
But they wanted the Chess sound, you know. They started out doing all Chess sounds, and I always used to say that they wanted to mimic. They would have loved to have done Chess Records to be exactly like the originals, but it came out like the Rolling Stones, which was great.
I don't want you to wash my clothes. I don't want you to keep my home. I don't want, 'cause I'm telling you, I just wanna make love to you.
Back in Britain, the Yardbirds' choice of a poppy song for their next single left their lead guitarist distinctly unhappy.
I didn't like the way they were going, and I thought it was all really just a joke for us. And I was actually fanatic at that point. Fanatic and wanting to get deeper and deeper and deeper into the blues. And they wanted to get lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter into what ended up as being 10cc type music. No offense, but, you know, and there was an ultimatum issued, and I said, well, okay, I'll leave.
Eventually he outgrew them, you know, he overtook whatever intentions they had in the first place. They veered off in, they wanted to do pop music and he wanted to pursue blues. By the time he'd left them, of course, he was what I consider the, you know, the finest that there was. Wasn't anybody better than him.
Clapton joined John Mayall's group, where he was asked to play only the purest of blues. Mayall even took the unprecedented step of giving him individual billing on their next album. But the Yardbirds were left needing a new guitarist. At London's Eel Pie Island, one of the favoured clubs on the blues circuit, the sharp-eared Gomelsky found another guitar hero in waiting.
I was buttonholed by Gomelsky, sidekicks. They said, you're going to be in a top band. You know, I said, really? When is this? They said, be at the Marquee tomorrow morning, or whatever it was. And smarten up as well. I don't like the sound of it. I thought it might have been the Beatles. And I look in there as a bench with about 20 guitar players there with all their cases. So all of a sudden I was in this sort of audition. I didn't enjoy that part of it at all. And Keith comes running off the stage with his squeezy respirator, and he said, "Don't worry," he said, "all these people are just, you know, before we knew you were coming, we'd auditioned them and give them the date to turn up. So if you can just sit around and listen to them, or come back in an hour, you know." And some of them were pretty good. And I thought, well, this is a bit embarrassing. And so he said, "What? By the way, what music are you into?" And I said, "Well, blues." And that was bingo, that was right. I said the right thing. He said, "Play me some blues." He had another puff, and I said, "Well, I haven't got an amp." He said, "Just play me a few lines." So I played some Matt Murphy runs and Buddy Guy, and he said, "That's it. Everybody else, you can go."
With Beck in the lineup, the group started to get some limited commercial success in Britain, if not in America. While Clapton had been a blues purist, Beck was open to a more experimental approach. Fuzz tone, feedback, dive bomber runs, and harmonic sustain were all part of his explosive arsenal.
The Yardbirds were sort of a compromise. You know, at least I was in a band that was working and doing what I loved to do. But there was just nagging, you know, from America all the time. You know, could it possibly be that we'll get a gig in America? But we actually got to our first tour in 1965 and got really close to the bare bones of where we'd all come from. Chess Studios, Sun Studios, and stuff like that. And Chess was synonymous with great drums and great bass sounds and harmonica. And it was instantly recognizable from any English recordings, which we loathed. We didn't like the, if you'll pardon the expression, BBC. With no slur on it, but the studio technicians didn't really have any grasp on where the dirt was coming from, the vital ingredient in the sound that seemed to be automatic to the Chess people and America in general, that they had a much more good understanding, clear understanding of what you wanted and knew how to get it. But coming back to England, we suddenly meant something because we'd done a fairly significant tour of the States, record doing well in the charts, and we got asked to play at the Richmond Jazz and Blues Festival, which was the place.
Shindig goes to London.
The popularity of the British blues bands meant they could introduce their audiences to the original artists who had inspired them in the first place.
With my feet, I get you like a drum beat in my hand. No fancy chord, just a solid, dry boom. a lot of soul, a lot of feeling. You hear it, you gotta listen. You gotta stop and say, hey, what is this?
Even if white kids couldn't always dance to the originals, they began to realize that up till then, they had only been listening to cover versions.
One thing that the R&B scene did for British music is that became the Chicago blues became the starting point for people when they were looking around for a source of material to cover, to play. And then, you know, they found their own identities, and of course everybody went off into their different directions on a very gradual basis.
But then Mick came up as a figurehead, the singer, who got more of the spotlight on stage, so then Brian's sort of there, and then Keith's playing solos, so he's there, and he jumps about a bit more than Brian, because Brian just kind of hops, you know, and does his tambourine bit, but Keith's diving about. So then he's losing a bit more focus, and then when Andrew and Mick and Keith get into their little trio, then he kind of gets a bit ostracized, you know, and pushed away, and he kind of dropped out a bit.
Satisfaction finally gave the Stones a breakthrough in the States with their first American #1 and paved the way for a string of Jagger Richards hits. But the writing was on the wall for Brian Jones. Meanwhile, the struggling Yardbirds were yet again looking for another guitar player.
What are your two names?
James Page and
David Haskell. Both from Excelente. And you're just learning to play the guitar?
Yes.
From a teacher. Do you play anything except skiffle?
Yes, Spanish and dance.
Do you? Well, can you move on? What are you going to do when you leave school? Take up skiffle?
No, I want to do biological research.
In fact, he grew up to become the most sought-after session musician in London.
I've been doing all this studio work, and after a while it started to get really boring. It was fun in the beginning of it, but it was like, oh, do what you want, do what you want. But then 80%, 90% of the time I didn't know what session I was going in on. And one day I did a Muzak session, and it was horrific. It was just reading music all the way through. They don't stop. It's just like you hear it in these horrific riff things, you know. You just keep turning the music and playing, oh, that's it, I'm finished, I'm out. And that was at the time when I was hanging around with Jeff, going to Yardbirds gigs, and the bass player decided to leave the band, and I joined on bass just to help me out on a couple of gigs, and then it was on to guitar.
When Jim joined, I lost focus of where the Yardbirds should have been going, or could have been going. And it was the fact that we were overqualified in the guitar department and underqualified in the writing department. And we really should have taken stock there and said, look, we'll waive the tour, we ain't ready for that. You know, but instead, we just took the opportunity and it burned itself out.
It was 33 days, 25 of those were doubles. So we finished off the first half of the show, then we'd drive on to the next show. And I mean, we were all in a bus. People were sleeping in the luggage racks. I mean, Beck stood about 3 days of this and jacked it in.
I freaked out, went mad, had a breakdown, and I think I walked out and left the band. So the Yardbirds continued without me, and I disappeared, and Jim carried on.
High-volume, supercharged rhythm and blues was now firmly on the agenda. Even Eric Clapton had enough of being a blues purist, and in 1966 left the Blues Breakers to set up power supergroup Cream, along with Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce, both former Alexis Corner players.
We didn't give a damn about time playing with one another. But we were all just going in completely different directions half the time. And then we'd blend in and get together. But I was very, very happy there for a while. None of us was the band leader, so no one would say, stop, all right, enough. So if one of us took off...
reworked several early blues classics, including Crossroads, originally recorded in the 30s by the legendary Robert Johnson. The often told story about Johnson was that he had sold his soul to the devil at a crossroads in exchange for his formidable musical talent. It was part of the hard-living, hard-drinking blues myth of romantic self-destruction that many of the 60s guitar heroes felt they had to live up to. By 1966, the Animals were crumbling. Alan Price left, splitting up a burgeoning songwriting team with Eric Burden.
Half the gang was doing LSD and half the gang was drinking. And the drinking side were pointing fingers and going, "You're frying your brain, you know, you're gonna die, you're gonna lose it." The half that were doing the drugs were going, "Look at the state of you, you know, you're totally drunk and incapable, you can't even stand."
We're just sitting semi-pissed in Tokyo this night. And Eric and I, we just said, it's not as much fun as it used to be, is it now? Why don't we call it a day? And literally, we knew we had committed ourselves to contracts until the September of that year. And we said, well, we're not going to get involved in another court case, because, I mean, we'd been quite a flaky band. We hadn't turned up at a lot of gigs. There was writs flying around like confetti at times. And we said, as soon as them contracts are fulfilled, we'll just call it a day. You know?
Chandler decided to start a career in management and began looking for new talent to foster.
The last two of the Animals were set up for America in July '66. And I went over in July, a couple of weeks ahead of the rest of the Animals, because I was going out with a very attractive lady in New York at the time. And she played me this song by Tim Rose, Hey Joe.
Where go with that money in your hand?
God, that's a great song. When I get back to England, I'm going to find a band that I can record this with. And we went down to the Cafe War in Greenwich Village, and Jimmy was there. It was like a pickup band you just met that afternoon. Jeff Beck and Eric Clapton. That's well, the pals of mine. I've known them 2-3 years, you know. And that was the only question he asked. Oh yeah, he also asked what were the amplifiers like in England? I said, hey, you can get Fenders in England. And that was as far as, literally, as much as the questions he asked.
Jimi Hendrix had begun his career on America's Chitlin circuit, touring with artists like B.B. King and Little Richard. So when he crossed the Atlantic, he came with a real blues pedigree. Who now lives in Ireland, was an aspiring lead guitarist who heard that the Disintegrating Animals might have a vacancy. He went along to audition for Chas Chandler and the others on their return from the States.
After the audition, it was sit around, they'll come out and tell you, you know. And that's when Chas Chandler came up to me and said, can you play bass? I said, no. He said, well, would you mind sitting in with this guy? So I sat in with this guy, a drummer, and a keyboard player. He played 3 tunes with no vocal. I was playing a bass guitar, which I'd never played before. And then this American gentleman asked me to go down the pub and asked me if I'd like to join his group. And that's in September '66. That's Jimi Hendrix.
To complete the lineup, they took on Mitch Mitchell, whose ferocious drumming style was not far away from that of Cream's Ginger Baker.
When he got up in the morning, put the guitar on. He'd be frying bacon, he'd have the guitar on. He'd take the guitar to the loo, because it was it had old tiles around the loo. He liked the echo. You know, he walked around with a guitar on 8-9 hours a day. It wasn't by accident he was that good. Nobody gets that good by accident. could go out at night and see the worst band in the world. But if a guy dropped his guitar, you'd hear the noise it made, and you could go back and produce it immediately, you know. You'd hear one good thing that the band did in its entire night. And you'd go, oh, it would register with him. It's very aware.